I'm Ashley Murphy, and this is my wife, Eliza Priest. We are now here in Brisbane, Australia, after what was, I think, the most complicated project of our lives in terms of planning and executing this trip. Just to be clear, that this is not personal financial, tax, or investment advice. We believe the information represented here comes from reliable sources. You do well to obtain private counsel for your own situation. So with that said, a little bit about my background. Most of you know who I am and my expertise as a financial advisor. Here's what we work with regards to clients. But today, let's talk about what we're covering today. So surviving quarantine, what would we have done differently, and the situation with Eliza's position now that we're here in Australia. Okay, looks like that animation got a little bit screwed up, but why don't we do a recap of how we came to be here from July. I think it must have been very early July. I was in Crested Butte on a financial advisor retreat, and Liza called me out of the blue and she said, "What would you think about moving to Australia for 18 months?" And I said, "Oh my goodness, that's such a big change. I can't possibly answer you right now. It would be a dream come true, but I just have to think through everything that this is going to involve." And so I called back the next day. I said, "Yes, that would be awesome. Let's do it." And so here we are. So what did it take for us to get here?
Well, we had to do all the immigration stuff because the girls and I were American citizens. The girls, so we immediately started figuring that out, and we've talked about this in previous webinars. So that had to be figured out. Then what to do with the dog, what to do with the house, what to do with the cars, as you can see.
Yeah, so we just sold, donated, disposed of tons of things. So just right-sized all of our possessions. Figuring out what to move and what to store was the next big challenge. We ended up buying, I think it's like 10, maybe 8 or 10 different suitcases, and then baggage scales to make sure that we were going to be right with the dimensions and also with the weight. It still ended up being an enormous amount of stuff that we moved. Here are some other things: doing the detailed budgeting for the trip. That's where I come into it with that budget template that I shared in the last webinar. Liza quit her job. That was a major move. Liza loves what she will do again. And she'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this presentation. And we undertook numerous home projects to get it in a rentable state, including having to move out entirely to do a virtual staging where they recorded what the house would look like if it was empty, and then we moved back in. But thankfully, we found a good tenant, and she just moved in the past week. Let me see here. So we were able to obtain the house that we're in here. We've got a wonderful 5-bedroom house here in Brisbane, and we were able to do that by getting a friend to help who really acted as an agent. And it ended up being a very competitive situation where when he FaceTimed us from the viewing of the property, there were at least a dozen other people looking at this property. And so it was extremely competitive. And we ended up having to offer a little bit over asking for the weekly rent to get the place, but it was tremendously helpful having a local presence. We also booked a second set of flights, courtesy of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. We ended up traveling on the Qantas flights, which was a godsend. They were far more affordable than what the commercial flights were offered by Delta.
If people are interested, people that are listening today, if any of you are interested in trying to do a move like this soon to Australia, we can talk in detail if you let us know if you want more information about how to deal with the flights, because there's a lot to know there, and we don't need to go into it in detail if nobody needs to know the ins and outs. But if you want us to go into detail, let us know.
So what else did we do? We put our dog in foster care. Who knew that a 7-year-old beagle would be a celebrity? And we ended up getting a whole bunch of offers, and we had budgeted an amount for what we'd have to pay someone, but in the end, it ended up being a privilege for someone to look after him. And we're covering the cost of the vet care, and we've drew up a contract and so forth. Nancy, we can talk about that in a little more detail in a minute. We did our quarantine, so we can talk about tips for surviving quarantine and not going crazy. Ended up flying in a backup flight, and I'll talk about the things that we would do differently. We ended up having to use this gigantic Chevy Express. It's like a UPS truck practically, to haul around all of the stuff that we had, because the Delta flight fell through at the last minute and there just wasn't time to do all the research that required. So we spent the last 2 weeks since we've arrived here, and we've now been out of quarantine for almost 3 weeks. It'll be 3 weeks this Friday, just obtaining furniture, looking on Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace, IKEA, and accepting things from friends and family that they don't need. So do we want to talk just briefly about flights?
Yeah, I think that if you're looking to move in the COVID era, meaning before Australia opens up,
and you're not exceedingly wealthy.
Yeah. So what we did was found a flight on Delta that was relatively affordable. I think it's $2,400 per person.
Yeah, that in itself was completely crazy.
Pre-COVID though, that wouldn't be considered affordable, but now it is. So we booked that, and we were feeling quite confident because Delta wasn't getting a lot of, as far as we could tell, a lot of cancellations and stuff. We also, this is very important, I think, to register with the Department of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Trade and Affairs, DFAT, as a stranded Australian. Stranded Australian. Because sometime in the last 2 weeks of December, probably, we got an email that said it was like December 30th, December 31st. We were taking a little retreat up in where was it? We were in Stillwater, Minnesota. Got this email, and they said, we've got 5 flights leaving next week, and then each week for the next 5 weeks into early February. Once a week in January, they had a flight leaving from LA. And we thought, we don't need to book that. Should we book that? And we did, and we're very glad we did. We did book it because we verified with Qantas that it was completely refundable up to 24 hours, I think, before the flight. And what ended up happening was we were leaving on a Monday with Delta, or a Tuesday, and on Friday they have the caps to most of the states in Australia. And so we were very worried that all of a sudden our probably not, but certainly a chance of getting bumped or canceled off of Delta, all of a sudden that increased to, it's a pretty good chance that we'll get bumped. So the Department of Foreign Affairs flights at that time anyway, of course, were protected from the caps, or not counted towards the caps. And so we ended up just canceling the Delta flight because we thought it was much more likely that we would be able to take the Qantas flight. So I think lessons from that, I had heard that people were booking backup flights. And I had thought that seems like a lot of money down the drain. Lessons I would say from this whole experience was, if you can get assurances from the airlines that you can cancel and get full refunds, which a lot of them are doing, then do a backup flight, because you never know the situation. What was happening when they have the caps when we were coming in is that all these new strains, the UK strain was coming out, then the South Africa strain, and Australia is pretty conservative. And so all of a sudden they put the brakes on things. And you just don't know if that's going to happen right before you plan on going. So if you can finagle a second flight, do it. We did get full refund from Delta, which wasn't easy. We pushed for it. We got on the phone and we talked for 45 minutes with a very nice Delta agent who admitted he had no specific knowledge about the situation in Australia. And he said, well, these are non-refundable flights. And we said, are you is there any way you can make an exception? Because this is a pretty incredible circumstance. Like, we have no control over the fact that they've have the caps and yada, yada. And finally he said, well, let me talk to our global advisory desk or something. And he did, and he got back on the line and said, well, they're going to give you a full refund. And so,
after half an hour of telling us it was impossible.
Right. So he was really nice about it and stuff. But I think the airlines really want to work with people. I mean, in retrospect, I think they'd rather give a full refund to a family of 4 who are happy to take the refund, because that's going to mean that they don't have to cut 4 people at the gate, so they were happy to give us our money back, because that'll allow 4 people on the flight that maybe would otherwise have to be cut. So if you can finagle it, do a backup flight, and really try and negotiate with the airlines to try and get
the thing it's worth mentioning though is that I think we were extremely fortuitous, and we count our blessings, but we wouldn't have been able to travel on the backup flight if we hadn't already had the primary flight. And what I mean by that is, it took us, I think it was the end of October where we booked our Delta flight. And so at that point onwards, it gave us the motivation. This trip is happening. It's real. We need to plan for it really taking place. And it was only at the end of December, so 2 months later, that we heard, oh, by the way, in 3 weeks' time from now, you can fly on this backup flight. And so that's why we decided to do it. It was very difficult to even book that, because Qantas is as nice and reputable an airline as they are. Nowhere in writing was it written that these were in fact refundable flights. So we did kind of pay that money, thinking this could be thousands of dollars down the drain if they renege on that.
Yeah, but we'd also had 2 people, even though it wasn't written anywhere. We'd called twice, and 2 Qantas employees had said the same thing, that it was totally refundable. Shoot, I was going to say something else. Oh, yeah. I think that the thing about the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade flights is that they happen last minute, right? It was just what Ash was saying. So if you want to be able to take one, you have to be ready to, like, they tell you weeks ahead of time, not months ahead of time, that they're available. So you have to sort of have your life ready to pick up and go. That's just another point. I've seen a lot on the Facebook. Oh, the other thing is, if you're really thinking seriously, join the Facebook groups about us that are usually something like Australians in quarantine, something like that, because there's a lot of good information, and there's a lot of good information on those Facebook groups. And a lot of people were saying, I just got told there was a DFAT flight, but I can't pick up my life and leave in 2 weeks. So people weren't able to take advantage.
And that's been interesting. I've had clients that have told me, hey, I've had no problem flying at short notice. And I understand that, because it's if you're renting or you're able to, just quickly up and leave, and it doesn't mean completely uprooting your life, then you're in a different situation as someone, with whose partner has a job, whose kids are in school. Life just doesn't up and move like that. It's a big, big, big undertaking. So if you can just go quickly, then you're probably fine. But for others, it would be a more significant project, I think, to be in that, situation where you could depart quickly.
The other thing is, in case you don't know already, Australia is now requiring a COVID test prior to entry. And that was also changed like 3 days before we were going to come. So the caps got halved, and they all of a sudden said you need a COVID test. So we did have to scramble a little bit, but you do some pre-planning and make sure you're going to get your COVID test within 72 hours and yada, yada. If you're on a DFAT flight, they will tell you what day to go and where to go. It's very controlled of where to get your COVID test. The other thing I wanted to say, if you're planning on doing this, if you look on the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade website, there's an international consular service line that's open 24 hours a day. And that's the best place to call. It's on the right sidebar of their website, and it says, oh, it's called Emergency Consular Services, something like that. And they will answer any time of the day or night. And I found that that's really the most reliable place to go to, because when you're coming up on your flight, you're going to want to be contacting them regularly and saying, is there any change in the requirements? Do I have to get, do children now have to get it? All of that. You want to know exactly what's required right before you leave, because they're changing those rules all the time.
So, risk management update. Liza obtained overseas visitor health cover through Medibank Private. We spoke about that last time. Myself and the girls have got Medicare just through the government. We're in the process of obtaining private cover to avoid the Medicare surcharge. That's an additional 1.5% tax that's applied above a certain income bracket. So that's something I'm looking at. Being an insurance fiend as I am, I guess I derive peace of mind for myself and for my clients doing this kind of research. I touched base with a number of financial advisors that I know here in Australia, and the best contact I got was this guy here, Mike Kincaid. He's an independent agent, and we were able to get really good quality coverage at quite competitive prices. So we've got renters coverage, individual valuable items like computers and iPads and whatever. They're all covered, full replacement value. Same thing on the car. It's actually more than the replacement value. So that feels pretty good to have that all taken care of with someone, who's going to go into bat if there is a claim. Foreign exchange, that hasn't been going in our favor at all. So folks moving US dollars to Australia, we're looking at the worst exchange rate in 3 years. Might it go higher? It seems like it's edging higher. It's not good for me, but it is good for folks moving Australian dollars to the US. Is it a good time to do it? Well, it's above its average of 72 cents. Let's just say that, and I think it's going to come back later in the year, as you've heard me say. But these things I can only make an educated guess about that. So where are we now? Let's a bit of an update here. So we're here living in Brisbane, in the suburb of Graceville, in case anyone was wondering. We've got kids in school, running 2 businesses, and Liza is working in the business. Maybe you wanted to say something about that?
Well, if you are an American spouse coming here and you want to come here now, you should probably, what we were told is to get come in on a tourist visa, because if you apply for a spouse visa from the US, you won't be able to enter till it's granted, which can take a long time. So I'm on a tourist visa and I don't have working rights. I can't work or earn any money. So I'm helping out in an unpaid capacity with Ash's business, which of course keeps money within the family because he doesn't have to hire somebody and pay them to do what I'm doing for him. So that's how we've worked it out.
And that's on the GFP side of things, not Arete. So no clients will have the privilege or pleasure of interfacing with Eliza on the Arete side. Okay, so tips for surviving quarantine. What tips did we generate from our 2 weeks in quarantine?
Well, I think it depends if you're traveling with little kids, if this will be all that relevant to you. But if you're traveling with little kids, you need to bring a ton of stuff. You can also order stuff. You can have stuff delivered to your room. So I know that a lot of families have just ordered things from Kmart or whatever, and that's fine. You can get food delivered. You can ask for an adjoining room, depending on the hotel you're in, which we did ask for because all 4 of us in one room with Ash trying to get some work done wasn't going to work. And we do believe we are going to be paying more for that. So those are things you need to ask about. And
that's worthy of an aside in itself. I spoke with Queensland Health, who checked in a number of times, and we did another couple of COVID tests throughout the quarantine period. And I gave them the call, and I said, I want to, really figure out what this is going to cost, because on the website, the quote for a family of 4, I think, was about $4,800. But then with the adjoining room, was that going to be different? It was all very hard to tell. And honestly, that's probably the only complaint that I would have about the whole experience. I pressed a number when I was speaking to Queensland Health. They have these complaints or compliments, and I said, I just want to thank you. You've done such an incredible job. I'm sure 9 out of 10 calls are the complaint side, but I just think you've done an incredible job, and I'm so grateful that this whole program exists. But we still have, it's not like, it's not unlike going to the doctor in the United States and asking the receptionist how much the visit is going to cost, or the doctor or the nurse. No one knows what it's going to cost. And that was frustrating. We were given 3 different prices. So it's going to be somewhere between $4,500 and $8,500. It said it's 10 to 12 weeks before the bill arrives. So we're still waiting for that bill.
Anybody want us to go into detail on quarantine or how to finagle it?
Well, there was, speaking of the word finagle, there was little finagling. You know, we'd read on the Facebook groups that there was an ability to maybe negotiate a little bit with the staff that meet you at the airport. We found that was absolutely not true. We just got lucky with the place that we were put in, which was the Crown Plaza on the Gold Coast. It turned out to be very nice. But there was zero negotiation. The police officer that escorted us to the bus, she said, if you've got complaints, call Queensland Health. Like, there was no negotiation whatsoever. So, you know, we just resigned ourselves to our fate. Mm-hmm. Moving on. Okay, what would we have done differently? I think in retrospect, we would have, and some of these things we did because we had to do them. So I'm not saying, gosh, that was in every instance here, I'm not saying it was a bad decision. If there was the flexibility to do it differently, then we would have. And we would have for sure shipped goods instead of brought checked bags. We had a ton of checked bags. You know, it took 15 minutes to, I just saw your comment there, Sarah. Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone's hoping for that hotel. We wish we should have shipped goods instead of brought checked bags. It was a big headache bringing everything. Wish I'd packed my bikes more carefully. Both of my bikes are out of action, and I'm super frustrated. Because of COVID, there's a worldwide parts shortage. So now I have no bike that I can use. And all of the fitness that I built up over the winter is being lost on a daily basis because there's nothing I can do.
If you do, I mean, this is just a silly aside, but if you do bring a ton of bags versus shipping stuff, so I think we actually had on the order of 25 checked pieces.
No, it was 15.
15 checked, and then we had 8 carry-on, 2 per person. So I read that somebody did this on a Facebook group, and I thought, let's just do it. So we had a tag for every bag, and every bag had a code number. So we had a list of all the bags. Every bag had a code number, and every time we had to transfer on or off a flight, we could just pull out the list and check off all the bags. The other thing that was really helpful is when you're going through customs, if you want to bring in stuff that they're going to need to look at, like food items, if you have a list of where those are, so that they don't have to open 15 bags, but you know that like all the food is in bag A1. Like, I think I had 4 bags with food spread out between them, and I knew exactly what type of food was in every single bag. And I just handed the list to the lady, and I said, this is all the food items or things that need to be declared. So food, anything that needs to be declared, I knew exactly where it was, in which bag, and it was on a list. And she was very happy with that, and therefore only checked a single bag, because she knew I knew it was in them. She knew it was organized. She said, is this all commercially produced? I said, yes. And that was it. And I've heard a lot of other people say that they will check every single bag. If you're at all disorganized, they will go through everything. And that was just really nice at the end of a long journey to not have to have them go through 24 bags.
And the lady even complimented Eliza on that, didn't she? She said, wow, this is so...
Well, she said this is super organized, but I'm it wasn't my idea. I just copied it from someone else, but it kind of, it facilitated the whole process. And also when I was looking for things to feed the kids, I knew where to go too. Like, I knew exactly what bag everything was in.
And we didn't want to trust, our memories after the sleep deprivation, with so many, it just simply wasn't possible to keep everything in our heads. So that was helpful to have that checklist. I still have a car in Minnesota, which is a tremendous nuisance. So I'm trying to sell that. I wish I'd just cut the price and come to terms with that sooner. And then also confirm with the property manager how we transfer over all utilities. So we're still, for the next week or whatever, still on the hook for our internet and electricity and whatever else. We've got to figure that out. But there honestly was just too much going on. Dashi here has got a question about what's the definition of a stranded Australian.
I don't know the official definition, but I think it's anybody who's an Australian citizen that's abroad.
Yeah, I don't think it's that strict. I think it's if you're an Australian. Yeah.
Any Australian abroad
trying to get home.
And I mean, can get on that list. You just have to go to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade website and register yourself as a stranded Australian. Stranded. I mean, that I think is that's, I guess,
subjective.
Do you feel stranded? I mean, but it's for any citizen abroad, as far as I know.
Liza, you're on the hot plate here.
So on the visa I have, I can't work. So how do I, do things that interest me and also sort of start to figure out the professional scene here in my field, which is I'm a nurse practitioner. My background is in refugee and immigrant health. So, you just start Googling volunteer opportunities, professional organizations. There's an organization called Refugee Nurses of Australia. I'm having lunch with one of the directors of that on Friday. There's a school for refugee teenagers just a couple blocks from our house. I'm going to look into volunteering there. I mean, I think you start to try and get into the scene. So if you do, if I do get work rights when I transfer apply for a spousal visa, which I will, then I am already learning that who's who in my area. If you have any sort of professional licensure, there's a whole process to go through. So to get licensed as a nurse practitioner here, I haven't even really started looking into that, but I assume I'm going to have to take boards over again and things like that. So this is not rocket science.
Okay. And it's really at that point that I want to open it up for any other random questions that folks have. So feel free if you wanted to ask us a question. Now is the time, as it's also going to be the conclusion of this series. So really anything that we've covered over the course of the last 4 episodes. Yes. And we'll give you a second to write those questions.
Are you happy with the decision to move? Did you consider renting an Airbnb? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we are happy. I mean, gosh, that really depends on the family, doesn't it? And the people involved. But yeah, we're very happy. It's turned out great. It's such a relief to be here. I mean, it was the most stressful and involved thing that we've ever done as a couple. The quarantine served as this like forced downtime that just starts as soon as you get here. And that was really nice because all of a sudden you just sort of deflate and you can do nothing but sort of process and relax. So that was good. I think we're very happy. We did consider renting an Airbnb. We didn't do that. So in the area that we're living, there's no long-term furnished rentals, which is the first thing we looked for. But there are Airbnbs, and some of them you can get a little bit of long-term, like 2 months, something like that. But there weren't any really long-term, a year, 2 years, 6 months long-term furnished rentals. But you certainly could do that. I just think that we're not in an area where there's a lot of transient people. In quarantine, you cannot leave your room, period. You don't go to the gym, you don't go for walks, and that's countrywide. We did have a balcony, and you can open the door to your room to get the food that they leave outside.
And that's it. You
cannot leave your room. But you can order in and rent exercise equipment So
Yeah.
and that's not expensive. We hired a little exercise bike for $90 for the 2 weeks. It's not expensive, 90 Aussie dollars.
Well, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, it wasn't a great one, but
the Google review did not have 5 stars on that thing.
yeah, even though, I mean, I've heard in Sydney that people were renting it for $200 for 2 weeks. I mean, it's not hugely expensive. And then a lot of people brought stuff, brought those
TRX stretch
bands. Stretch bands. We brought a yoga mat. We did a lot of yoga. Something ingenious that I thought, if you've got kids that need to move their bodies, people brought like a climbing rope set that you hook over a door frame, and their kids climbed on that, constantly. So you can't leave your room. You can't go to a gym. You can't go for a walk. But I did see one guy on Facebook ran an entire marathon in his room one day, back and forth. I mean, you have to do it. Can you talk a little bit about how you're managing 2 businesses?
Oh, before that, Sarah asked a question. So the Airbnb, we actually did rent an Airbnb on 2 separate occasions, but with all of the changing arrival dates and the lease commencement date was fixed, and it wasn't going to be until 10 days originally after we arrived before we could move in. So we had an Airbnb at that point. I think Airbnb, they're probably skewed to be a little bit too flexible, honestly, towards the tenant. So it was great for us, but I felt a little bad for the landlord, because we could cancel without penalty, which we ended up doing because of our friends in this neighborhood. They said, well, hey, why don't you stay with us? And they've got kids the same age. And when we thought it through, we thought this would be great. Why don't we do that? And it ended up being a really positive experience, other than Eliza breaking her toe on the first night there.
So the other thing to say, we actually we had 3 Airbnbs rented.
Did we?
Because early on, before we had rented at the house here, we were wanted to get our daughter into a certain school, right? So we needed to live in the catchment area. And so we actually wrote to the Airbnbs in the area, which were only 3 in the catchment, and asked them if they would be able to do a long-term lease. I think I asked for 2 to 3 months, and provide some sort of lease document that I could take to the school to get her signed up. And one lady did say yes, and she said, I can give it to you for 6 to 8 weeks, but I have done this before, and I'm happy to provide you with a lease that you can present to the school and get her signed up. So if that's a concern, you can, if you find an Airbnb that's willing to rent to you and provide you with a lease, you could get your kid in the school in the catchment area. So that's something you might consider if that's a concern for you.
And then, Sarah, I'll only briefly cover this because I did cover this in a previous episode in detail about running businesses between the 2 countries. Mostly it's been there's been a lot of flexibility from my staff, who now work a little bit later, but are able to. Thank you, Kellen, by the way. I see you here. Who are able to maybe start their day a little bit later too, and work on Sunday nights just for a quick check-in. So my whole schedule is moved around. So now I work Saturday mornings as well, but Monday is kind of a day or a half day off for me because it's still Sunday in the US. The 2 tax entities, though, that's a little more complicated, figuring out, where is the source of income? Is it first taxed by Australia or the US? And then the differences in the tax years. So recognizing income in the Australian year, it's been interesting. I've worked to defer US expenses to such a time where I'm in Australia, so as to bring down the Australian taxable income. There's a lot to get into on that, and it's very specific to an individual situation. But I want to thank you all for your interest in this. This has been a really fascinating experience for both of us. Certainly the move itself has obviously been very involving, but also to see who's interested. And it's funny, a lot of just clients that aren't planning, as far as I know, at least planning to come back to Australia, just love staying in touch and hearing the sort of blog, of what we're doing and the challenges involved. So thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, for that. And we appreciate it all. And
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out with questions. I mean, if people email you, you can forward them to me. I know Ash is, you know, busy beyond belief, but I might have time to answer questions by email or something. So
thanks so much, and have a wonderful day. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.